this book, Philip Bobbitt sets out with clarity and courage the first really comprehensive analysis of the struggle against terror and what we can do to win it. Above all, he understands that this war is new in every aspect of its nature, close quote. That last quote was Tony Blair. It's remarkable to me that a book that has received such praise from so many thoughtful people on the American legal and the international law and the international strategic scene, it's remarkable to me that a book that receives this kind of praise is so deeply iconoclastic and challenging. You begin this book early on by saying, I believe that almost every widely held idea we currently entertain about 21st century terrorism and its relationship to the wars against terror is wrong and must be thoroughly rethought, close quote. You mention literally hundreds of ways in which you think our conventional thinking about terror on all sides of the question, right, left, is wrong. One of the most fundamental is, what are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with crimes, albeit very serious and very dangerous crimes, but is our problem a criminal law problem, or are we truly at war? Why don't we start with that issue and your view? War or crime?
I would say war crimes.
War crimes.
I would say that we
That's
are,
war. That's not criminal law.
That's right. That's right. I would say that we are at war, and I would say that the failure to appreciate the nature of the war we are in has really paralyzed both sides of the debate. On the one hand, the warriors, our men and women in uniform in the armed services, don't see this as the kind of war they're trained to fight. And on the other hand, the lawyers, the people who are protecting our Constitution, our civil liberties, don't see this as a sort of warlike threat that would justify any particular effort or exertion on the part of the government. Let me give you one example. When General Tommy Franks said that the end of major combat operations had occurred in Iraq, the coalition had lost 146 persons. We've since lost more than 4,000 more. Why did he tell us that? What, was he lying to us? Not at all. He had occupied the enemy country. The enemy army had surrendered. He'd removed the enemy's political leadership. He held the capital. It's over, right? Of course, it wasn't over, but he had a particular view of warfare. And that view of warfare is shared by people who refuse to think that you can have a war against terror because they think, come on, these are just ordinary crimes. This is the IRA, this is the PKK. These are the kinds of low-level annoyances that sometimes threaten democracies, but it's not like World War II. They are held captive by the same picture that held some of our military leaders.
And yet you argue, and I think completely persuasively, that to limit our understanding of war in the 21st century, dealing with terror, to limit our understanding to the old one, which I think was Tommy Franks, I've defeated a state. War is when states fight against one another in a situation, in a historical context, where it's only states which can amass the destructive power to threaten the very existence of another reasonably viable state. And yet you argue that 20th century view is blinding us to the true nature of what the terror threat today is. Could you elaborate on?
Sure. I live about half the year in London, and I have for a long time, 27 years now. And the most common phrase you hear in Europe, particularly in Britain, is that we know terror. and you Americans don't. And after 9/11, because you were not accustomed to terrorism, you overreacted. You reacted in panic. But we who've had to battle the FLN, the IRA, ETA, we know what level of threat it really portends, and we know how to cope with it, and you don't. What they know is the IRA, the PKK, the FLN, they know ETA, they know 20th century nation-state terrorism. Although these are ancient countries, they never mention the sack of Rome by terrorists in 1527. Erasmus wrote to Sadoleto, not just a city, but a whole world has been destroyed. They never mention the sack of Antwerp in 1576 by terrorists. They don't mention the terrorists who were pirates in the Caribbean in the 17th century. They don't mention the colonial terrorists of the 18th century. They don't even mention the anarchists of the 19th century. They focus just on a certain kind of nation-state, national liberation terrorism. Al-Qaeda is a very novel organization. What you said, Benno, is exactly right. For 5 centuries, since the birth of the modern state, at the time of the Renaissance, only states could pose lethal threats to other states. Only states could keep armies in the field for decades, could conscript on a huge scale, could build fortifications, develop new military technologies, organize alliances. And that's still true. But it will not be true for long. We were never at war with the IRA. That would have been silly. Or the PKK. But we are at war with Al-Qaeda because they are a global, networked threat that is ardently seeking weapons of mass destruction.
You know, there's a passage in your book, and you quote Bruce Ackerman to this effect, that one of the historical watersheds that all of us in this room have lived through, I don't know whether it was in the last 5 years or 10 or just when, we have lived through the first time in history that weapons of mass destruction are not the monopoly of the state. And you talk in this book about how the globalization of the world economy and the scientific advances which are leading to the miniaturization of explosive power and the proliferation of nuclear weapons creates a situation, perhaps not today, but quite predictably in a year or 5, in which a terrorist group can have access to weaponry that could kill 1 million people in the city that we're sitting in tonight.
I'll just give you 2 examples. Pakistan has a small arsenal of nuclear weapons. This is a country that cannot make durable metal rods. They didn't achieve this sophistication by developing it themselves. They were engaged in a black market in stolen and pirated nuclear designs. That black market connected North Korea, Iran, and other states. And it is on the black market that terrorists will find nuclear materials. It's not because they're going to develop a huge reactor somewhere and then go through the whole process themselves. The second example I'll give is what I think is really more threatening, and that's the development of biological weapons. It used to be that governments were really the only people in this game. You had the occasional cult, which could never really succeed, and the governments were confined to 2 or 3 weaponizable pathogens, anthrax and botulinum and so on. Now you can get on the web and get the genome for smallpox, which is something like 70% fatal. None of us have any immunities left, though you may still have a little scar. You can get the genome for the 1918 flu off the web that killed 50 million people. Someone has even put up on the web the genome for polio.
It's not